Good afternoon. Could I ask everyone, please, to remain standing? It is with great sadness that I have to announce the death of the Lord Lieutenant of North Yorkshire, Barry Dodd, Stuart Nimmo and Stuart Briggs. Barry Dodd was appointed by the Queen as Her Majesty's Lord Lieutenant of North Yorkshire in September 2014 on the retirement of Lord Craythorne. His memorial service will be held on the 20th of July in York Minster at 11 a.m, which is open to all to attend, and I and my wife will be attending along with the Chief Executive. Stuart Nimmo worked for this authority as the director of the former City Learning Centre for 9 years. He was 67 years old. Stuart Briggs worked for the authority as a highways operative and spent the whole of his working life in the authority or its partner organisations. He worked for the authority for 39 years and he was 55 years old. Our thoughts are with their families and friends. Would members please join me in a minute's silence as a mark of respect? Thank you. Could you please remain standing for prayers?
God, our Heavenly Father, hear our prayers and renew our trust in your Son, Jesus Christ, whom you have raised from the dead. Strengthen our Christian faith that Barry Dodd, Stuart Nimmo and Stuart Briggs, and that all who have died in the love of Christ will come to share in the glory of the resurrection. We ask this in the name of Jesus Christ, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever.
Amen.
We pray for our borough of Redcar and Cleveland. Almighty God, the maker and ruler of all things, we humbly beseech you to bless and prosper the people of this borough of Redcar and Cleveland. Strengthen our commerce, sustain our industries, nourish our agriculture. Strengthen and sustain our communities. Bless the work of our charities. Uphold and support our children and prosper all places of learning. That this borough of ours may truly be a place where all generations flourish. We ask this in the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord.
Amen.
May God grant to the living grace, to the departed rest, to the Church, the Queen, the Commonwealth, and to all people unity, peace, and concord, and to us and to all God's servants life everlasting. And may the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be upon you and upon your counsels this day and forevermore. Amen.
Thank you. Would you please be seated? Just a couple of items before we get into the order of business. If any member gets too hot and would like to remove jackets or cardigans, please feel free to do so. And can I ask, if you have a mobile phone, that it is put on silent or turned off, please. First item of business, apologies for absence.
Mr Mayor, I've got a number, Brenda Foster, Councillor Sheila Hollyoak, Councillor Helen McCluckey, Councillor Lynn Pallister, Councillor Leanne Reid and Councillor Dale Quigley. And Councillor Brian Dennis as well, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mason, Councillor Harding and Councillor Jones and Councillor Nightingale will be joining us as soon as she can. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more apologies?
Councillor Wells, Mr Mayor and Councillor Watts.
Thank you. Any more apologies? Okay. Thank you. Next item is to receive declarations of interest. There should be a form going around if members could please sign it. Item 3 is to confirm the accuracy of the minutes of our meeting held on the 24th of May. Could I please have a proposer?
Yes, can I move those minutes, please, Mr Mayor?
Seconder? Thank you, Councillor Moss. Well, everyone in agreement? Okay, thank you. Item 4, to receive announcements from the Mayor, Leader and Cabinet members. From myself, I would like to thank everyone involved with Armed Forces Week. Last Saturday, Armed Forces Day was a lovely day on Redcar High Street, well organised and very enjoyable, and with good support from the public. I have received a letter from Major Pat Ralph of the Yorkshire Regiment to thank everyone who was involved in arranging and supporting the Freedom of the Borough event last Thursday. It was a fantastic event with a wonderful turnout, and the soldiers felt privileged to attend. I will arrange for the letter from Major Pat to be placed on our website for members and staff to see, but I would like to pay special attention and thanks for all the work that Jane Holmes did in helping to organise that event. I know the stresses and strains she went through for a number of weeks until it all came together last Thursday, and she is specifically mentioned in Major Ralph's letter. I'd also like just to briefly mention a couple of charity fundraisers. Charity Golf Day will be taking place at Hunley Hall Golf Club on the 21st of September. If anyone plays golf, or has friends or family that plays golf and would like to come along to that, details will be coming out shortly. And starting in September, I will be doing a sponsored slim. I'm told by my wife that I need to do it. I will be sending details off. I won't be necessarily asking for sponsorship individually. What I hope to do is invite people who want to join me on the sponsored slim to get sponsorship, and then perhaps we can share the sponsorship between my charity and charities of the choice. So if anyone fancies going on a sponsored slim, please join me. I've already had, I think, four volunteers, one who is sat in a pink shirt at the back there. Can I ask if there are any announcements from the leader?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I don't know if anybody from the Labour group's going to go on a sponsored slim? No, they're all breathing in, they're all fine, thanks. So good luck with that. Just a few things from me today. First of all, some of you will know that just this morning, actually, we've got back from the Local Government Association annual conference in Birmingham. And I just wanted to raise with you on a very non-political basis the key issues that are being picked up by local government right across the political spectrum at the moment, because I think it's just a little bit reassuring to know that everybody else is suffering in the same way as we are. And there was a question time, I think it was yesterday morning, and they picked out sort of what are the key issues that we are all concerned about at the moment. I'll just read the list that came up. And the key ones are, not surprisingly, social care, children's services, housing, which isn't quite so much of an issue for us, but is for many of the other boroughs, young people, particularly youth services and how we support young people, and also the complete lack of action in any other policy area because of the Brexit debate that's going on in the moment. And that's a non-political statement, it's just a statement of fact of the difficulties that local government right across the country is dealing with. And I think, I have to say that I think the LGA is doing a very good job in actually promoting our voice, even though, as I say, that some of the difficulties that we're dealing with. And I think they actually confirmed something like, I think it was I can't remember what the figure was, but there is a very significant deficit for local government generally now that is an acknowledged figure and known by everybody. So I just wanted to say that first of all. The second thing I wanted to say is that you will have seen that on the agenda today there is a motion on the NHS. Whether you support that or not, that is there to coincide with the 70th birthday of the NHS. I don't know about you, but my mum was a nurse that was trained in the very early days of the NHS. My dad was a radiographer who worked in the NHS all the way through. Our family has had reason to use the NHS on a number of occasions. I'm sure all of you will have done at various times. And I think we as a council should put on record our thanks to all the NHS staff who work in this borough and right across the Tees Valley for the brilliant work that they do. And perhaps we could just give them a round of applause. The third thing I've got to do is a very nice thing as well, and that's another award for another thing that we've just... Are we doing that now? Am I doing the award now, Mr. Mayor? Yes? Is that where it comes on your list? Right, well, the award this time is a project that you will know quite a bit about, because we presented another award for the same thing just the other week, or the other council meeting, and it's actually for our Grangetown Employment and Training Hub. And it says here, and I shall read it to you because I think it's really important, that the community project to increase employment in the borough, which is what that is, has received its second major national accolade. Our business employment and growth team has received the Municipal Journal's highly commended certificate for delivering better outcomes in recognition of the work of the hub in Grangetown. And this follows on from, here it is, the previous win in April, which was the first at the Local Government Chronicle Awards. So since opening in February 2017, the hub, in partnership with local employers and community groups, has helped 677 people into employment, 216 of whom are employed at MGT on the site down at the dock. And the council was just one of 5 finalists shortlisted from more than 80 entrants, and the award ceremony was in London. Obviously, this is fantastic news again, and it's a real testament to the hard work of the team involved, who are absolutely committed to providing opportunity and tackling unemployment, and also to the community themselves, who've obviously embraced the service, and the other partners who work with us. We've now, as many of you know, got a similar scheme opened in Skinning Grove, and again, it's starting to look just as successful. And I think, as I said last time, Middlesbrough have adopted a similar approach as well. So it's definitely a model that's working. And we have with us again, we've seen quite a lot of Margie these days, Margie Oliver, who's going to come and present the certificate to the Mayor. Thank you, Margie. everything from me. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey, and congratulations to everyone involved in making this award possible. Now come to announcements from Cabinet members. Councillor Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, this council welcomes the industrial economic growth from existing and emerging companies as they come into the borough, and indeed the growth that comes from the leisure and hospitality industry, a growth which represents 10% of the UK's GDP and is the 4th largest employer. I am pleased then to announce that Eston will be making a contribution to this economic growth as it sees the return of a former signature sporting event to the town. Eston will host the return of the Eston NAB Challenge Race on the 18th of August, starting at 10 o'clock, along with an event village that will provide an open-air market, food court, free children's entertainment, games, stalls, and alongside other contributors, the Eston Heritage Exhibition. Those members and officers who are up for a more demanding physical challenge are invited to enter either of the 2 hill races set at 10k and 5k, the details of which are on the council website. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Norton. And Councillor Hannaway.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 3 announcements today. First of all, this month we say goodbye to Sharon McBride, our service manager for Looked After Children. Obviously, it is a very tough job being the service manager for Looked After Children, and Sharon is a very passionate advocate for looked after children and is very committed to helping them develop their lives. I think the Leaving Care Service was the area she was most committed to because that's the area she came from. Sharon has been helping me to write these reports for Looked After Children that I do at every full council meeting since 2015. I'm sure she's really going to miss my little lectures about the use of the hyphen in the adverbial phrase. And I'm sure you'll join with me in wishing her luck in retirement. She's worked for this authority for 36 years. So best wishes to Sharon. Secondly, I'm delighted to announce that our Inspire to Learn Centre has been named the North Regional Provider of the Year by the Careers and Enterprise Company for its work in supporting careers education and helping young people into the world of work. These awards recognise and celebrate inspirational work being done by schools and colleges, employers, volunteers and carers around England. There were 200 nominations. They won because they submitted a joint bid with Foundation for Jobs for providing what are known as education employer encounters, which research has shown have a long-term impact on reducing NEETs and helping young people to live more successful lives. The £50,000 grant allowed them to offer fully funded events to all secondary schools in the Tees Valley through Redcar and Cleveland Council, with Inspire to Learn acting as the hub. Because of clever use of funding, even though they do say so themselves, the events were well subscribed and reached about 2,000 students and 4,000 primary-aged children. So congratulations to Andrew Stockdale, who runs the place, and who is, because of this award, speaking at the Education and Employer Task Force International Conference today, following which he will be presenting his work at a reception at the House of Lords this evening, where he will also collect the award. And thirdly, I'd just like to mention that the Education Policy Institute has done a piece of research into school performance in both academy chains and local authority schools in England for 2017. And right at the front of the report, our primary schools are mentioned. This is a quote from the report. Authorities in London continue to outperform other areas of the country, with 14 of the top 15 local authorities being in the capital. Outside of London, Redcar and Cleveland was the highest performing local authority and was 5th overall. So congratulations to our primary schools, and let's hope that they can continue to do this amazing work as they're broken up into academy chains. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hannaway. Any other Cabinet members wish to make any announcements? Okay, I'll pass on to item 5 and ask to receive any announcements from the Chief Executive.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No announcements today.
Thank you. Item 6 is to consider questions from the public. We have one question. Could I please ask Glenda Thompson to come forward, please?
Can I start? Yeah. Why aren't you as a council more proactive in monitoring care homes and care agencies to see what is going on instead of waiting until there is an incident happens before you go into these homes and investigate? Councillor Walsh.
Councillor Walsh, can I ask you to respond, please?
Yes, I will do. I have to start by saying that I have to actually refute the main part of your question, in the sense that in that question there is an assertion which I think you'll find on reflection may be wrong, and I'll explain why. First of all, Redcar and Cleveland Borough Council, obviously like every other adult services council, takes the quality of care in our borough very seriously. Everyone has a right to receive safe, high quality care, and we undertake a number of proactive steps to support residential care homes to provide the appropriate level of care and to identify where care falls below the required standard. I do need to say, incidentally, as somebody who's actually spent time in a residential home and in supported accommodation, I've seen this at first hand. The latest Care Quality Commission published ratings, that was in June last month, showed that care homes in Redcar and Cleveland are amongst the highest rated in the North East, with almost 9 out of 10, that's 89%, being awarded an overall rating of outstanding or good. This places Redcar and Cleveland second in the North East, and certainly much higher than the regional average of 80% and a national average of 79%. But obviously, you can't be complacent. The last thing we want is a slide in that performance. And we're continuously looking at ways to support care providers. And I'll give some examples. There are a number of different ways that we assure ourselves as to the quality of care. We've included additional performance measures in the latest residential care contracts to ensure quality of care is maintained. So in a sense, the money follows the results. We hold a care home forum every 6 weeks with care home managers and owners, focusing on issues of quality of care with providers. Perhaps I could add to that I do myself also see care home managers on a fairly regular basis. We continue to offer free workforce development training to private sector care staff on all our training courses. We undertake an annual contract compliance visit to each residential home by a dedicated compliance officer. Our new quality and compliance approach includes a revised compliance assessment, themed reviews and audits, and real-time, on-the-spot intelligent gathering. We have created a new provider quality team to enable better information sharing and a coordinated approach to addressing concerns about providers. We have formed a new safe care team with additional resources concentrating on the quality of care in care homes. This involves joint working between the commissioning side, the safeguarding side, and the practitioners to maximise user resources, gather agency intelligence across all agencies through real-time reporting, on-the-spot reporting, and timely responses. We hold a monthly provider review meeting attended by professionals across social care, the National Health Service, the CQC, Safeguarding Compliance and Commission to discuss any concerns about providers and the standard of care delivered. We have a programme where counsellors on a rota visit care homes on an annual basis and report on the findings of these visits to Adults and Community Scrutiny and Improvement Committee, and that is a meeting held in public. We have an agreed formal process in place where care providers automatically trigger an invitation to Adults and Communities Scrutiny and Improvement Committee where there's been issues of quality, so allowing that committee to scrutinise and challenge the quality of care and to gain greater insight into the issues faced by providers. Again, that is a meeting which is in the public, open to everybody to attend. We fully participate in the Making Safeguarding Personal programme as part of our approach to ensure that the resident is at the centre of all decision making when safeguarding concerns are raised. We have made it mandatory that all practitioners speak with a person receiving care as part of any assessment or review alone, without the presence of care staff, so that person can express any concerns they have freely about the quality of care. We have implemented our safeguarding assurance framework involving senior managers observing quality of practice in care. We are, with the other borough councils, statutory members of the Teesside-wide Safeguarding Adults Board and provide quality assurance to the board on our safeguarding activity and the quality of care in our borough. Now that is the, if you like, the work that we do as a council. There are, of course, other agencies in the field, all of whom have a input, all of whom are agencies where you may wish to make contact with. There are wider issues, I think you'll find, about the quality of training for care providers and care workers. There are reservations and concerns that I share and others share, and they've been part of a national debate. And with your agreement, Mr. Mayor, I'll perhaps try to cover some of those in the second question.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Walsh. Do you have a supplementary question?
Given that there is no register for carers when you need a licence to be a hairdresser or a bouncer, and given the fact that the Francis report in February 2013 recommends a register for carers, what are you going to do as a council to ensure that care homes under your jurisdiction are employing the right calibre of people, as the council has a duty of care to everyone who is fully or partially funded? And also, I refute some of the things that you said in there, because in my personal experience, some of those just don't take place unless they've taken place in the last 6 or 7 months.
Thank you. Councillor Walsh would like to respond again, please?
First of all, they do happen. I've been there when they happened, actually, one occasion. I've been part of visits, I've been part of reviews. It's part of my own education. Secondly, the issue of accreditation and training is an important one, and I'll take your point, and what I will do is, after this, I will pass that on to our head of service, and perhaps ask him to make sure that is actually picked up as an issue with the providers at their next the next review, and we'll also get you a comprehensive reply about accreditation. There are obviously issues around making sure everybody has a safeguarding and BDS certificate, and again, we've had issues about that with individual providers in the past, but if there are concerns, can you let us know on a personal basis, and I will certainly take it up. I just want to pick up those wider bodies, because again, they have perhaps even a greater role than we do. There's a CQC, which is obviously a national body. It's actually headed by a former Director of Social Services, Borough, David Bean, and that regulates and inspects care service to make sure they meet the fundamental standards of quality in care. The CQC is ultimately the central body which has a statutory duty to report to government. At a voluntary level, there's a group called Health Watch, and Health Watch is, again, a statutory body set up by statute, which works with local people, patients, service users, carers, and community groups to get the best out of local health and care services. That doesn't just mean improving service today, but influence and shaping those services to meet the needs of communities tomorrow. And, I'm happy to actually send you details of Health Watch and the staff there for you perhaps to speak to them. There is, of course, also in every residential unit, the whistleblowing protocol. And Redcar and Cleveland Council is committed to the highest possible standards of openness, probity and accountability. And we obviously support legislation afforded by the Public Interest Disclosure Act 1998, and therefore encourage elected members, employees, contractors, members of the public and others it deals with to come forward and voice serious concerns they may have about any aspect of the council's work or indeed any aspects of the work of a carer. We promote the use of the whistleblowing protocol for any member of care staff employed by providers that have concerns, and certainly in the registered homes that I visited, and in one case lived in, there were very large posters giving the phone numbers of the whistleblowing service on every floor and at the entrance, and it is used and used effectively. In a wider basis, we've also set up, and you may have read about this in the Gazette, something called the Care Academy. It's well documented. Obviously, there are national issues regarding recruitment of workers to the care sector. There is a huge churn with people coming, leaving and going, added to which there are issues of esteem, added to which low pay, added to which, if you like, a very challenging workload. And so as part of a response to all these issues, the Redcar and Cleveland Care Academy has been established in partnership with the Council, Redcar and Cleveland College, Coast and Country Housing, Job Centre Plus, and our commissioned service providers, including the residential homeowners. It provides training for future care workers to address these recruitment and retention issues, ensure a consistent high standard of quality care is delivered in the borough. A guaranteed a guaranteed interview is offered with a local employer on completion of the academy. And this programme has been very successful to date in identifying candidates with the right values to provide care to our most vulnerable residents. In a more wider context, you will know, or you will have heard, I think, that the National Audit Office raised their concerns as a national auditing body with the issue of care quality and with the issues of recruitment and retention of care staff. And they produced a very comprehensive report, which I've got a copy. A copy of that was given to Anna Turley, your Member of Parliament, and she will be using that as the basis for the 10-minute rule bill that she's working on and which you discussed with her. So these issues are known to us, they're known to the other agencies, they're known to the Audit Commission, they should be known to government. And I'll end, Chair, by just saying, as I've said before, that on every occasion that we've spoken, I've said that I'm willing to sit down and talk with you on a one-to-one basis. Up to now, you haven't wanted to take that offer up, but the offer is still there.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Walsh. Thank you for your question. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Can I ask you to take up Councillor Walsh's offer if you wish to do so? Thank you for the questions. Thank you, Councillor Walsh, for your answers. Item 7 is to deal with business remaining over from the last Borough Council meeting. I think third bite of the cherry, Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Here's my annual report, as mentioned by the Mayor, third time lucky. As always, I'd like to start by thanking all the officers from the frontline services to the management team for the continuing hard work over the last year. Cuts to funding has brought many pressures to the local authority. However, all those in the Neighbourhood Directorate continue to deliver an excellent service under very difficult circumstances. Also, throughout my reports, you will see many references to volunteers and the amazing positive impact they have on helping the council deliver many projects and initiatives across the borough. The impact that those who give up their own time for the betterment of the borough continues to amaze me. So with this in mind, I would like to take the opportunity to thank each and every volunteer for all their efforts over the last year. Moving on to 3.0, it's Rural Affairs and the Countryside Affairs. As mentioned at 3.1 on page 2, it is with great pleasure to note that visitor numbers continue to rise at both Flats Lane Country Park and Gisborough Forest. The Countryside Apprenticeship Programme has again been very successful. Over 15,000 volunteer hours have helped deliver many of our countryside services, with another 119 new volunteers from our community supporting existing volunteer bases. At 4.0, I would like to talk about the Love It campaign. This has been a pivotal campaign and continues to galvanise volunteer support, as I mentioned above. If I could thank the community development team that have played an integral role in the success of the campaign so far, and let's hope it continues to grow. At 5.0 to 5.17, I have highlighted many issues and service demands placed on the Neighbourhoods Department throughout the past year. in terms of keeping our borough as clean and as attractive as possible. The team have dealt with 4,111 service requests. This is not taking into account all the requests made informally by members in the chambers today, and also on the ground requests that the frontline lads and lasses deal with it every single day. Under the section of my report, I want to highlight in particular the constant efforts to try and combat fly tipping, which I know many of you have raised with me over the last year. Members will be aware that the department has worked extremely hard to combat this issue over the last year, increasing the street action teams from 3 to 4. These teams are trained not only to proactively seek out fly tipping, but to also investigate to see if we can find out who's responsible for the fly tipping. I'd also like to thank proactive members in the chambers today for engaging with the neighbourhoods teams and about bringing out your dross days, which has had a positive effect on the levels of fly tipping across the borough. I'd also like to thank members for appreciating that through the Shape Now Future cuts, that resources are limited within the directorate, and patience they display between each bring out your dross day in their wards is really appreciated. Getting the fairness and balance of our resources are deployed is of great importance to me, and make sure that everyone's fair and everyone's getting coverage within the wards. If I could move on to 6.0, on page 6 of my report, and how we are doing at dealing with the vast amount of waste generated across the borough daily, and how well we are doing at promoting recycling across the borough. I am very proud that Redcar and Cleveland can report the highest recycling rate of 42.6% compared with our neighbouring authorities. And at this point, I would like to personally thank Councillor Kerr for his proactive attitude at working with the team and identifying future strategies, even after I've taken the red tag his recycling bin. In most cases, the teams have delivered total zone clearance with understandable exceptions during the beast from the east, and I think it's again appropriate to thank the team for all their hard work during what proved to be a very difficult winter. Now, if I could move on to a very emotive issue, which is community safety at 7.0, which is understandably of utmost importance to members and residents across the borough. The Council continues to support Cleveland Police and partners to try and tackle antisocial behaviour across the borough, with actions took over the last 12 months to try and minimise the impact ASB has on our residents' antisocial behaviour. These actions include days of action in areas that report high levels of ASB, as examples such as Bankfields, Grangetown and some wards in East Cleveland, with information and intelligence passed on successfully through the CSGs and also members across the council. The deployment of mobile CCTV cameras has helped to gather intelligence, and also the invaluable support of our CCTV team. Our ASB officers are as proactive as possible, with high demands on a team affected profoundly by Shape Now Future cuts since 2010. This is demonstrated by one of our ASB officers, Sue Atherton, being nominated for the Police and Crime Commissioner's Community Safety Award for her hard work in Greater Eston. Residents across the borough, rightly so, wish for themselves and the families to feel safe, with recent calls for more resources in areas such as Loftus, Saltburn, East Redcar. The SB officers are trying their utmost to be proactive with what is a very challenging issue. For example, street teams have been visiting Saltburn on a weekly basis throughout June, and will return in the future if the situation deteriorates again. If it could also draw attention to the importance of proactive councillors and members in the chambers working with officers to find long-lasting solutions. I look forward to the feedback that comes back from the seminar facilitated by the council with councillors Thompson, Smith and Hannaway next week, and the youth teams to identify what can be done to create activities for youth in Saltburn. I would again like to thank members from across the council for the patience and understanding that resources are limited in the SB team, and their appreciation for the proactiveness of the team and the officers. At 7.7, I explained that I will be reviewing all our enforcement procedures over the next year. Members can be rest assured I will continue my strong stance on littering, dog fouling and fly tipping. Finally, if I could just touch on the libraries and customer services at 8.0 on page 8. Members will hopefully appreciate that I've always tried to minimise the impact of austerity cuts on residents across the borough. However, an ever-decreasing budget with some visible cuts have been unavoidable, unfortunately. The opening hours of our library have been cut. However, I am ensured that we would not lose provision in any of the locations across the borough. And yet again, I would like to thank the 11 volunteers that are currently supporting library staff Groups such as the Friends of Redcar Cemetery are an example of how we can move forward toward libraries becoming more community-run and focused. We are always looking at ways we can improve the offer, and member feedback has been invaluable in this process. Again, if I could use the Saltburn Council as an example of working together for the greater good. The library is now closed on a Sunday with hours being distributed across the week. We could also thank Councillor Smith and other members that give up their time to volunteer in their own library to ensure it's open for longer. I thank all members today for your attention and invite any questions on the subject matter contained within the report. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Deputy Mayor, Councillor Kay, please.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. I was going to praise you, but it seems as if it's sort of tit for tat now, so I don't think I can. But no, seriously, I do think you do a conscientious job for the whole borough, no matter what area it happens to be. And, you know, I've enjoyed working with you in our subcommittees and so forth. I've got, and what I'm going to say now isn't in any means critical. You know, I think there should be a change in policy in one area, and I think basically in another area, my ward needs some help, and quickly. You may have seen there have been two big stories in the Gazette about crime in Lingdale. And of course your portfolio does include community safety. For those who don't know, there's been a crime wave in Lingdale which lasted about 2.5 weeks. Over that period of time, crime quadrupled in the village. There were over 40 break-ins of vehicles, homes, sheds, garages. This was done by a small number of men who we understand were stealing to feed a drug habit. The police got, I'm sorry to say, didn't get off the mark very smartly, and the thing eventually got out of hand. And had it not been for efforts by the community and myself to make them take serious notice of what was going on, then the thing would have never stopped. Eventually, the village was flooded with police, and a partnership was built up between the people and them. As part of this working together, a private person managed to get some CCTV pictures of the main culprit, and he was arrested 3 times already. 3rd time lucky, there was enough evidence to put him before the magistrates. He got 44 weeks. We expect him out in about another 20 from now. Which, it's not just the crime itself which has upset everybody to a great degree, but as you mentioned in your report, fear. The fear of crime is almost as bad as the crime itself. And we fear that after, say, in another 20 weeks' time, this person is going to get out and the whole thing will start again. Because these people...
Can I ask you to put your question, please, Councillor Kate?
These people have no fear of being arrested. I think most of them are happier in jail than when they're outside. So it's a very difficult situation. Now, you say here, you're the chairman of the Redcar and Cleveland Community Safety Partnership. You've had success in Grangetown and Bankfields. One aspect of this has been the redeployment of cameras. Can you please give similar attention to Lingdale?
Thank you, Councillor Kay. Councillor Brown? Okay. Thank you, Councillor Brown. Can I just remind members, this is a question and answer session, not a debate, and please to put succinct questions. Thank you. Councillor Lanigan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for your report, Councillor Brown. I would ask you, can you have a look at the CCTV cameras in Loftus, both in the Marketplace and Station Road? We've had several incidents where the police have actually gone to look for any evidence and the cameras haven't been positioned correctly. So I would appreciate it if you would go and have a look or ask somebody to see what the issue is, because we've got a major problem. We've also got a lot of fly taping on Grinkle Lane, and I'm wondering just how much this is costing when I phone in to get our lorries out from Dormerstown to clear it. It's becoming a major problem. We sat there within the park, yards away from Grinkle Park Hotel, and it's become a regular basis where I've had to ring in and get them out. We have a derelict property at East Loftus, and I wonder if you could use your influence. It's the Royal Hotel at East Loftus. It has been abandoned by the owner. We've been in court twice. We are back in court again in a fortnight's time. They have removed the roof and most of the innards of this public house, which are strewn now all over the car park. We've got scaffolding up on that building. I've had to call the police out 3 times now. I've got children up there. The scaffolding company can't remove this scaffolding because the building's going to fall down. However, it's an eyesore. It's on the A174. I've asked the officers here if we can go in and clean that site up that's been left and dumped, and there is tons of it. And then we will charge the owner when we go back into court this time. Clive Watts has been very proactive and he's doing everything he can, but we need your department and your director to say, let's get in, let's get it cleaned up, and let's make the area safe, and then we'll see what happens in court. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Lanigan. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Councillor Lanigan. What I would probably suggest, if myself and Mike Green come and actually make a site visit, I think it was last year, I was last up there, so we'll come along. Certainly the operational cameras is very important, and I will ensure the team is straight on that for you, Councillor Lanigan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Evans, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Couple of comments, and then I will get to a question very, very quickly. It was just on the libraries and the involvement of groups such as Friends of the Cemetery, because I think Friends of Zetland Park are also using it. But I think the significant reduction we had of just 2 days opening with the reduced hours, I need to check some of the numbers, because I would hate to see that we would lose it totally. So perhaps I'm reassured that that won't happen. With regard to fly tipping, I sometimes wonder if we're not always being consistent in what we collect from households, and whether that needs just a new look, that what is classed is a number of things, or whether it's a single chair or a settee and a chair. And I think people get frustrated if they think they're being charged a lot and there's only one item taken. So perhaps that leads them to think so. I would perhaps ask that we can have some sort of review and consistency in what is being actually collected. And finally, I think it's the one that we've been around the houses for several years now, and it would delight one of my residents, and it's about school parking. And I know there was mention of a vehicle recognition thing. I don't know whether that's operational yet or when it will be, but it would be good to know if that is actually happening or whether it will happen soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Councillor Robbins. I'm more than happy to sit down with the officers and look at the bulky waste charges. Again, I'm not making any promises, but we'll certainly look at it. In terms of the plate recognition car, I believe that we're quite along the road with it. Highways was actually moved into the economic growth portfolio last year. So if I could ask Councillor Norton to maybe circulate an update for members, I will certainly do that for you, Mary. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I refer you to paragraph 7.4. I see that we have a community safety partnership and a motorbike strategy for nuisance and off-road motorbikes. For about more than 40 years, I've rabbited on, or more than that, about the South Gare. And I have failed absolutely dismally to get anything at all done. I thought there was going to be an improvement when the government brought out the SSSI sites. Nothing. Motorcyclists are being killed there. The whole area is an utter disgrace. We've had the police who once had a dedicated cyclist to go and monitor the area to stop it. That was okay for, I don't know, a short period of time. But I just wondered if this is going to be a moment of change, that we are actually going to do something about what is a protected area.
Thank you. Councillor Brown?
Thank you for that, Councillor Wilson. Hopefully you will have noticed on social media over the last few weeks, the police are really on it in terms of Operation Endurance, in terms of removing vehicles. Now, when it comes to the South Gare, we all know it's private land, so the council's responsibility in terms of trying to remove things or stuff from that is cloudy. However, there is a steering group over South Gare, and I think developments with the South East Development Corporation will be sort of gathering speed over the next year or two, and I'm sure we'll be get updated on that. But you can be rest assured in terms of the motorbike strategy, it's very important to us. My own ward, Dormerstown, we're plagued daily with it, so you can be rest assured that we're working closely with the police to try and get as many of these vehicles off the roads. Yeah, okay, I'm sure you will.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Nightingale, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much for this comprehensive report. I think, however, I've got three issues that I would like to raise. First of all, it's a very comprehensive report, but there is a lack of statistics which would have given us an explanation of the results of some of these initiatives that you mentioned. I think this is something that should be provided. I presume that this may well be. I'll ask the question, is this provided then to the scrutiny committee? Secondly, for some time there's been a talk of a Tees Valley recycling facility initiative, and which obviously would be a major investment in improving the level of recycling in the whole of the conurbation. So the question is then, what progress has been made on this? Perhaps Councillor Brown can answer this. And on page 8, on 8.3, you mentioned the New Life Methodist Church at Grangetown. They're also in operation at the library in Ormsby, and they're making a major contribution to the increase in footfall there. So I think perhaps we should acknowledge that, and I'd be grateful if you would do that. They're making a significant contribution to the maintenance of the library in our area, which is the only council facility in the whole of our ward.
Councillor Brown?
Thank you, Councillor Nightingale. It was very remiss of me to miss out Ormsby Library, and you get my full apologies. I shall certainly sit down with the team in neighbourhoods and discuss the stats and how we're reported in terms of that. In terms of any future sort of joint authority facility, that is something myself and Councillor Kay, we had a conference a few months back at the Hub. We're still sort of developing that future strategy. So at the moment, I couldn't sort of commit to that's exactly where we're going. However, it certainly is on the table to be looked at.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I first of all welcome back the portfolio holder. Having not had the opportunity to address this chamber now for 3 sessions, it's good to see him back in good health and on form. And he needs to be on form because we have a big challenge here as an authority, and members collectively in this chamber will readily recognise these challenges. To say that our performance is excellent is a misnomer. We certainly try hard. We try very hard. But sometimes we don't seem to be all pulling in the same direction. So there needs to be a meeting of minds about how we manage the environment and how we use the resources, limited though they might be, in addressing these challenges. We set up a task and finish panel last year It was going to meet again in December. It is now July. We have just today set a date for the next meeting. That isn't good enough. We talk about the cleanliness of our area. The portfolio holder has been, Mr. Mayor, round Saltburn on many occasions, and we welcome that initiative. But he will have seen cigarettes ends scattered on many roads. There, because licensed premises in particular, but cafes also, do not clean up outside the curtilage of their premises after trading. So, if we're talking about enforcement, then we need to be engaging with all those elements in the community who, either on purpose or through the conduct of their business, engage in or share in the creating of waste. So we have much more to do before we can say that we're doing an excellent job. So I would like to give credit today to one person who is retiring, not as an officer of this authority, but as a volunteer. Roy Smith, who has led the Beach Watch at Saltburn, looking after the East Cleveland area for 5 years, had his last volunteer effort this month. So I'd like to place on record and I'm sure on behalf of this authority, and if we could write to Mr. Smith saying thank you for all the work that he has done in leadership and which he's going to continue to do as a volunteer. Now, we've mentioned volunteers, Mr. Mayor, and it's really critical that we continue to support and encourage them. I would have welcomed in the report some data about how this authority is implementing its motion on the plastic-free coastline motion that we have passed. So I would ask if we could have an update as members subsequent to this meeting. Now, in terms of the environment, Mr. Mayor, just a quick question on how we manage pedestrians and cyclists. Because we are encouraging people to get out into the parks, get out into the countryside, but many of those people are endangered because we do not manage the mix of cyclists and pedestrians well enough. And we need to look at our bylaws and our enforcement in that particular respect. Now, my final point really is about asset use. We've heard about how libraries have shortened their hours, and some people are volunteering to
Can I
extend
ask you to put the question, please, Councillor Thompson?
So my question then, Mr. Mayor, is what more can we do or have already been thinking about doing in extending library opening hours through the use of volunteers? Because we have assets there that are not utilised that could be used for youth involvement, adult education, or as social opportunities. So hopefully that we are looking at that and will soon be able to announce what we are going to do.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson, for your observations. If I can just put in the context the cuts that we all know that we've received at this council since 2010. I think it amounts to £90.2 million and over a third of our workforce, over 1,000 staff. So when I'm saying that I believe that the lads and lasses out there on the front line are doing an excellent job, that's because I believe they are under the circumstances that we find ourselves in. In terms of your plastic motion that we moved some months back, there is a plastic strategy going to the next cabinet, so you will have the pleasure of reading that. Okay. And in terms of galvanising volunteers for libraries, the community development team, I think it's Tracy Hall Young in your area, are working extremely hard, asking all the questions, of all them different services and partners you mentioned there in terms of how we can keep our libraries open. In my report, we've already heard of Laburnum Library, Ormsby Library, Grangetown Library, where we are making success. But again, I would say there's only 8 community development officers, and it will just take time. Councillor Thompson. Thank you very much for your observations.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. And go on to item 8, which is to consider and agree reports from the Cabinet and Council committees. We have the Looked After Children and Child Sexual Exploitation. Councillor Hannaway, please.
Mr. Mayor. At the end of May 2018, there were 282 looked after children, a decrease of 1 from the previous month. 206 of those are living in foster care, 127 within house foster carers, 77 with independent or voluntary providers, and 2 are placed with a neighbouring local authority foster carer. 24 are subject to a care order at home, 8 are in independent living, and 8 in their adoptive placement. This is once again a very high number of looked after children. Perhaps we shouldn't be surprised at the level, given the situation in the country as a whole. Yesterday, the National Commissioner for Children published her annual Childhood Vulnerability Report, in which she says that there are 2.1 million children in England, which is 1 in 6, are living vulnerable lives due to complex family circumstances. 1.6 million of those, she says, are invisible children living in vulnerable situations, receiving no known support or help. Included in that number, she says there are 890,000 with parents suffering serious mental health problems, 825,000 living in homes with domestic violence, 470,000 whose parents use substances problematically, 100,000 living in a family with the toxic trio of mental health problems, domestic violence, and substance abuse, nearly 500,000 living in material deprivation, and 170,000 who care for their parent or siblings. This is clearly a national crisis. Until 2010, child poverty was going down. By 2020, there'll be a 2 billion shortfall in children's services funding nationally. Clearly, austerity is disproportionately hitting the vulnerable, the most vulnerable members of our society. And because it is children, 1 in 6 children, it is also damaging the future of this country. At 2.4 in the report, we see that a National Residential Care Leadership Board has been set up. This is to address the issue of the shortage of places for children who need the most secure accommodation, which is highly specialist accommodation. We have 2 young people currently in secure accommodation in Scotland because there's no places for them anywhere in the north of England. So this board is set up to try and address that lack of available places and the reasons for it. 2.5, we see that CAMS, the Children and Adolescent Mental Health Service, has commenced training for foster carers. This programme highlights in particular that the normal sanctions and rewards for children often don't work with look after children because of the associated anxieties of being in care and their difficulties managing their own emotions. So during these sessions, alternative methods of playfulness, acceptance, curiosity and empathy, or PACE as it's known, is promoted to support their developing self-esteem. At 2.8, you see that the fostering recruitment campaign is going really well so far. It is, or would be, considered, I think, a great success story, the recruitment campaign, were it not for the fact that the demand has also increased so much that it is still quite difficult to find appropriate placements for children. Moving on to section 3, which is about the looked after children's team. We are currently looking at how many of our looked after children, particularly the older ones, may be suitable for special guardianship orders now that we have our new special guardianship order arrangements. And for some of those children, it may be suitable for their care orders to be discharged and for them to move into the care of what we call family and friends carers. At 3.2, you can see, actually it says that they're preparing for their GCSEs because the report is written from the point of view of the end of May, although by now they've taken their GCSEs, and the virtual school head is working closely with schools to make sure they have suitable post-16 provision. At 3.3, there are some very encouraging achievements there of our young people, our young looked after children. You can see there that a Year 4 pupil has received the award for Best School Reader. Another one's been accepted to undertake a scholarship at Sunderland Football Club. And one has completed his first week at Army Cadet Camp and he's going to France, although I don't think that means he's going to join the French Foreign Legion. On to the next page. Members have had quite a lot of information in recent reports about the personal education plans that our looked after children must have. And the virtual school head has now secured the time of 2 pupil inclusion officers from within our current education service to support the strategies to reduce fixed-term exclusion rates, which are very much an issue we wish to reduce at the moment in both primary and secondary school. The virtual school has also secured dedicated time from an education advisor. Section 5, our leaving care service. On the 23rd of May, the chair of the Corporate Parenting Board, Councillor King, along with members of the leaving care team and the virtual school head, attended a conference at Teesside University on raising aspirations. This brought together academics and student social workers and criminology students, and particularly looked at the experiences of our unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. And it was positive to note at that conference that Redcar and Cleveland were recognised for our good practice with these young people. Over the page at 5.3, our health drop-in sessions at our leaving care service at Target are continuing on Wednesdays, in which nurses work collaboratively with the leaving care personal advisors to provide health and well-being advice to our looked after children, to our care leavers, about positive life choices and the dangers of risk-taking behaviour. I'll now move on to the child sexual exploitation section. Only a short one on this occasion. We've had some much longer ones in the past 2 or 3 reports. Currently, there are 27 children and young people who are being discussed by the Vulnerable, Exploited, Missing and Trafficked Practitioner Group, 21 females and 6 males. And Barnardo's are commissioned by us to deliver awareness-raising sessions and have recently done this to 20 paediatric consultants at James Cook University Hospital, as well as to our partner agencies, including health visitors, school nurses, schools, police and public health. And finally, on the last page, to continue to raise awareness, the Targeted Youth Support Service has delivered a number of risk-taking roadshows to 2 secondary schools, to 70 Year 9 pupils at Hills View and to 300 Year 9 pupils at Nunthorpe Secondary. And finally, I always finish with the taxi drivers. Only 11 of our taxi drivers have now not completed their CSE awareness course.
Thank you, Councillor Hanaway. Could we have a seconder for that report, please?
Yes, I'll second that report, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Right, Councillor Lanigan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for your report, Councillor Hanaway. Just a few things, really, and perhaps you could get back to me on this one. I understand that we've got 5 redundancies in the Careers Advisory Service, which is causing me a little bit of concern as to what replacement we're putting in there. And given the issues that we've got with Freeborough at the moment, it's a worry within East Cleveland. The child sexual exploitation, I was down in London last week and at a conference with a group of people from Peckham and from central areas of London. I was shocked and appalled by the numbers that were coming out of that area. They are working alongside the councils down there and the police. The numbers within these areas, particularly in the Peckham area and some of the more far outreaching areas of London, were shocking. This sexual exploitation, not just of children, but of vulnerable adults as well, we had in there. We were actually asked to, there was a chart up and there was numbers on it. How do you think this fared in here? Thousands we're talking about. We're not talking about 20, 30, which is bad enough. One's bad enough. But the numbers coming out of that area of London, they have done a big survey down there. They're working alongside the council, police, community. Everybody in there is trying to, because the lady who was giving the lecture, she was from a ethnic background. And at first what she said to us was that it was difficult to get in there into the community. People weren't happy to come forward over what was happening. They have gained the confidence of that community and the other 3 communities down there. And all of a sudden what they've got is a flood of what's been going on with children, young teenagers and vulnerable adults. And I know we get these reports of you, but I was shocked. The level of what is happening in some of these communities. And I just wanted to thank you for your report. And if you could just keep us fully informed as to where we are within Redcar and Cleveland. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hannigan. Councillor Kay, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sadly, well, perhaps not sadly, but of course, Anne Watts isn't with us today. She is recovering after an operation, and therefore she's asked me to read out this statement come question. So this is Anne Watts speaking, not necessarily myself, in case she makes a mistake. At the last council meeting, I asked Councillor Hannaway about Ofsted's report, which concluded that our overspent children's services required improvement. The report made 13 recommendations across all aspects of the service, including planning in various areas, up-to-date assessments of needs, and implementation of plans in a timely manner. These are all important areas of work, but Councillor Hannaway has consistently refused to report back on progress in these areas. He states that he reports to Cabinet, but that this is not good enough. We are all corporate parents, and he has a responsibility to keep us informed. He again fails to update us in the report before us today. Councillor Hannaway always tells us how important the service's work is against child sexual exploitation. Ofsted criticised the department for not preparing separate plans for these children, including key risks and actions of which Councillor Hannaway makes no mention. He does report on an increase in
just on a point of order, please. I mean, if we were all as councillors to send our comments via notes via other councillors, we'd all be here forever, wouldn't we? I mean, Councillor Watts needs to be in the chamber to ask her question.
She's ill.
And I obviously understand she's ill, but she could have sent this question in writing to Craig, and I'm sure he would have been very happy to have answered it. I just feel, you know, we're setting a precedent here that is completely inappropriate. We cannot have a situation where people can't attend meetings and somebody else comes in and reads out a speech for them. It's just not appropriate, Mr. Mayor. I think you need to rule on this one.
Well, I'll say the rest of it. the best bit still has to come.
Yeah. Can we say, having got so far through it, and he's only got a small way to go, I will on this occasion allow it to continue, but we'll seek guidance on whether this is something that we need to consider for future meetings. I take your point, Councillor Jeffrey, that that you should be in this chamber, in my opinion, to ask the question. But I will ask the Chief Executive and Mr. Newton to look at this. But having got so far through, can we just let it finish, and that'll be the end of it?
Ofsted criticised the department for not preparing separate plans for these children, including key risks and actions of which Councillor Hannaway makes no mention. He does report on an increase in work to substitute special guardianship orders for care orders and the replacement of such children back with their families and friends, which I consider a dangerous strategy. And he admits the said strategy is led by financial considerations. Again, Councillor Hannaway makes no mention of Ofsted's criticism of the rationale of such placements. Councillor Hannaway, it is your duty to update the Council on these issues. Why do you consistently refuse to do so? I assume he can't answer now because it's a proxy question.
Councillor Walsh, please. Sorry, Councillor Walsh, please.
Right, this is all my own work. Can I go to paragraph 7.5, the very last paragraph? I just mentioned to Craig a particular concern relayed to me by a licensed private hire driver, which is at the moment we are in the season of something which I don't have a lot of regard for, but are very, very popular, proms. And one of the problems with the proms, he had been booked to pick up a particular family with the children. Other children were coming home independently. Most of the cabs and limousines actually had been booked, usually by the parents, not by the school. Consequently, he said there was a feeding frenzy of private hire drivers from across Teesside and the wider northeast at this particular prom the other day, which I'll let you know what it is, perhaps in a note. He has just asked two things. Are we actually checking on such events? Could we send a licensing officer to at least one of the proms to check on what happens at the end? And thirdly, could we ask the schools to let the parents know that the schools are quite capable of booking cabs, and those schools will obviously have the names of cab companies and operators who have been positively vetted.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. Councillor King, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, with regards to 2.8, I'm absolutely delighted that we've almost doubled the number of inquiries through the fostering campaign from last year. I think a lot of that was down to having a member of comms who really got what officers and councillors were recommending and really put some fantastic work into the campaign. So I'd like to say thank you to him and the members of the Foster Carer Retention and Recruitment Panel. The only thing is, I was at the fostering launch event, and a very capable foster carer, potential foster carer, came to that event. I was very disheartened to find out that she's actually withdrawn from being a potential foster carer now, due to the rigidity and non-flexibility of expecting, when it's a two-parent family, both of the parents to attend for 3 full consecutive Saturdays when they already have their own children. So it might be something that hopefully with the Foster Care Retention and Recruitment Panel, myself, you and officers can get together and look at maybe offering flexibilities. This particular person's already adopted 2 children. She's gone through training galore. Her husband is a school teacher, and it would seem a real shame to me to lose somebody of that calibre because we can't look at flexibility around the way that we do the training and the way we offer it, especially when one of the carers is prepared to attend all 3 and possibly the second carer maybe one. So hopefully maybe that's something we can look at going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor King. Councillor Evans, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's just one about the PEPs, but it's actually on 4.4, 4.5, where we're looking to work with those on fixed term exclusion rates. And I've recently had some concerns about pupils who may need to be placed elsewhere, and it's been a difficult process. And I was concerned where we stood as corporate parents, because had it been a child with parents, they would have been there to sort of stand in that corner. And I'm not quite sure who was standing in that corner, but it is of some concern as to maybe the same as we have priority about keeping children in their existing school and that, what priorities we are putting to looked after children accessing alternative education. And I would be interested to know, I don't know whether we have actually got any, do we have any looked after children on permanent exclusion? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Councillor Ian Jeffrey, please.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I'm not sure I have a question of Craig. He may want to comment. I suppose it's worth reminding ourselves this report is not just for questions. It's one obviously for debate and decision. Councillor Kay earlier on raised the issue of antisocial behaviour in his ward, and I think suggested the police response was a little less than adequate. I think we've all got problems with antisocial behaviour, and sometimes our expectations are higher than they realistically can be, given the pressures obviously on the police and the reduction in officers themselves. But specifically around child sexual exploitation, for very obvious reasons, there's a high degree of police involvement. In fact, there's a fairly large, in relative terms, central team tasked to manage these issues. So it does beg the question, what level of resource is actually being given as far as child sexual exploitation is concerned? Because I think we would all agree, wouldn't we, that the interests of children in these circumstances are perhaps a little bit more important, that someone's making your life a misery through antisocial behaviour, as bad as that is. So there's a question of balance here. I mean, the police are in the position at the present time, for instance, of saying you won't automatically get an officer to attend if you've had some sort of a disturbance at your home, in which obviously nobody's been injured, and these things are perhaps becoming more and more common. So I just wonder if Craig's got a sense of the involvement of police and policing resources into some of these issues. I mean, I think we're led to believe, certainly in the forums that I go to, where criminal justice issues are on discussion, that what we're seeing is probably the tip of a very large iceberg. We know, don't we, from the historical sexual exploitation issues, that it's likely to be something that is going to come to the fore. So there will be a lot more devotion of these sorts of resources perhaps in the future. I think we need to understand that, and we need to know where we're going and what the likely reduction in terms of the wider policing responsibilities actually are.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Councillor Hannaway, would you like to sum up, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, Councillor Nanigan, thank you for your question. When you were asking it, I had quite a lot of sympathy for you, because I think the same thing happened to me as happened to you. You've obviously gone to an event, and the true picture of child sexual exploitation has been, put in front of you, and one's initial reaction is absolute horror, at what's happening. Yeah, and the same thing happened to me. I think in 2015, when I went to Newcastle to learn about Operation Sanctuary. There is always the fear here, obviously, of what we don't know. I mean, for example, Councillor Walsh raised a situation which, you know, we might then want to look into what's happening with the proms that, of course, we didn't know about before. And so we do rely on intelligence, you know, because obviously we can't be everywhere. We set up these systems, you know, elaborate safeguarding systems of children, but you're always worrying about something that might slip through, or about somebody who is meant to be in a position of responsibility, you know, doing things that they shouldn't. In terms of the careers, so if you asked about careers as well, this authority has had, like every authority, has had its education grant taken away, which means that most of our education workers are at risk. And schools now will have a statutory responsibility to provide their own careers service, which they can buy in from us, although we have diminishing capacity, you know, to do that. Obviously, those two things are like a chicken and egg. The more services they want, you know, the more buy-in, the more we can provide. But I think it starts in September. They have their own statutory responsibility to provide careers advice. Although I think we retain the responsibility for that for particular categories of children, you know, like looked after children and children with special needs. Moving on to Councillor Kay. I hope Councillor Watts gets well soon and is soon back telling me off. She asks about the Ofsted report. Well, obviously the Ofsted report, as I said to her last time, has its own service improvement report, which has been to Cabinet, which I told her last time. And I'll also be talking about it in my annual report. Obviously, the one I do here is specifically about looked after children. So the Ofsted report goes through every aspect of children's services, and it's the widest range of services in any department in the council. So there just isn't simply the time or space for me to talk about all of them here, or the plans we have to improve them all, because I'm assuming, you know, that a looked after children report has to be specifically about the 288 looked after children and how we're looking after them. But I'm always willing to provide Councillor Watts with any information she's looking for. And I think recently she did ask for figures about children's services spending, and they were sent to her by Barbara Shaw. So I think she does receive the information she asked for. Moving on, outreach workers. Councillor Walsh, yes, I think that's a situation we need to have a look at. Obviously, it does sound rather worrying. We do have outreach workers that work in the nighttime economy. I don't know at the moment whether they can be switched to have a look at the proms, but it's certainly something we'll look into, because it does sound a bit strange. Councillor King, yes, it was a good event. I'm sorry to hear about the foster care withdrawing. I assume you're talking about someone who's previously a foster care, who's already fostering, who's coming over to us? No? Was this a new foster carer? Right, okay, I'll pass that on. We'll have a look into that. I think what you suggest about getting together, is it the skills to foster training you're talking about? Right, okay. You see, I think they are quite strict with the skills to foster training. Even
I ask you to start summing up, please, Councillor.
Even foster carers who have come over to us from the IFAs have been asked to do it as well. But it's certainly something we'll look into. And Councillor Ovens, fixed term exclusions. As far as I know from the virtual head, there aren't any who are permanently excluded. Obviously, they are category 1 when it comes to school admissions. But it would be a shame if we had to get them to change schools because the school environment couldn't accommodate them. But obviously, I don't know the particular behaviour in that case. But we'll have a look into it. I'll write to you on that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hanaway. Right. Could I have a show of hands, please, for all those in favour of accepting the report? Okay. Thank you very much. Item 9 is to consider motions. Councillor Walsh, please.
Can I, on this occasion, just for the criminologists amongst the opposition benches, I won't be moving this because it was agreed on Monday at Labour Group, because I was very poorly that day. It was a danger that I might not be here today. Well, I am. But it was agreed that it would, in fact, I thought it had been conveyed to you by Alison. It'd been moved by Councillor Ian Jeffrey and seconded by Councillor Michael Dick.
Councillor Jeffrey, please.
Shouldn't have done that, should I? Thank you, Chair. Not only am I happy to move this particular motion, I actually feel very proud to move this motion, I have to say, Chair. We hear a lot about austerity these days, and Craig's articulated it fully a moment or two ago as far as the present situation is concerned. Austerity, of course, is the government's excuse for slashing public services, and we've now had to endure this for the past 8 years, whilst health and wealth inequalities have dramatically increased. In this borough, as we know, child poverty is up and life expectancy is down. 70 years ago, amid the ruins of the war and in the grip of another austerity, the post-war Labour government created the welfare state following the landslide victory in 1945 that sent 393 Labour MPs to the House of Commons. The most progressive administration of the 20th century brought in the 1946 National Insurance Act, which introduced social security, not welfare, as the Tories now dismissively label it. Coal, transport and electricity were nationalised. The 1948 Children Act established comprehensive childcare and the NHS. And the NHS began treating patients, all comers, on the 5th of July 1948, exactly 70 years ago today. But back then, this was not without its opponents. The Conservative Party voted 22 times against its creation, and the British Medical Association, mostly Tory doctors, said it was a dagger blow to personal freedom. Even today, they have not given up on their privatisation aspirations. In fact, the Coalition Government 2012 Health and Social Care Act gave the green light to further privatisations by subtly adjusting the duty of the NHS to enable services instead of delivering them, a major split from the principles of the NHS. And asked by the British Social Attitudes Research Centre in 2016 who should care for the sick, just 2% said private companies, a very, very small number, obviously. Progressive social policy has always been from the left in British politics. The minimum wage, equalities and health and safety legislation, and the jewel in the crown of the National Health Service. The Tory view is best characterised by Thatcher's infamous statement, "There is no such thing as society, only individual men and women and families." Over the years, the National Health Service has been bedevilled by political interference, such that it is comprised now of some 700 separate organisations with armies of lawyers, accountants and HR specialists. As some wit once observed, there were always two certainties in life, death and taxes, but now there is a third, reorganisation of the National Health Service. The motion calls for realistic and achievable objectives. Independent mapping of UK and social care needs and a commitment to a national development plan. An independent commission to advise on funding and management of the service. Rejection of budget slashing, unaccountable reorganisations such as the Sustainability and Transformation Partnerships, sensibly thrown out on a previous occasion by this council, although the latest iterations, accountable care organisations, are apparently on their way. An end to ideologically driven privatisations and democratically accountable oversight of the service. We might also usefully call for the scrapping of the internal market and wiping out massive PFI debt owed by many NHS institutions. I am pleased to commend this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Have a seconder, please.
Happy to second the motion, Mr. Mayor, and I reserve the right to speak.
Thank you, Councillor Dick. Councillor Evans, please.
I didn't expect to be up so soon. Thank you for that. I was one of those babies that just missed the benefits of the health service. But since then, my mother, who was dreadfully ill when I was born, had a successful birth of my sister 10 years later, when she was well cared for by her doctors and nurses. And recently my daughter, who found she had a heart tumour, was successfully operated on in Southampton and has had a very successful outcome, thank goodness. So 70 years on, we're not doing that bad a job in many respects. Ian, I think, mentioned about sort of the period of post-war period, and during that time people began to expect a little bit more from their health care, going back to the times of conscription, and there was a rise in expectations. I think it's important, although I don't want to deliver a history lesson, that 1942 there was a report, Social Insurance and Allied Services, chaired by the Liberal economist William Beveridge, better known as the Beveridge Report. And this was the first to set out a comprehensive state plan of social care. It did also incorporate National Health Service. The report was enormously influential, and it was noticeable that in the 1945 general election, all three parties endorsed this report. The Liberal Party manifesto said, "People cannot be happy unless they are healthy. The Liberal aim is a social policy which will help to conquer disease by prevention as well as cure, through good housing, improved nutrition, the lifting of strains and worries caused by fear of unemployment, and through intensified medical research." I think those principles are all there now. I'm happy to go along with the motion in sentiment, and I would not support it. However, I have some concerns about little tweaks of wording, and I'll be interested to know what crude privatisation is as opposed to any other privatisation. I think we do need a commission, whether it was a royal commission or an independent commission. We need a radical view of the health service from top to bottom, and we must not neglect to bring in both aspects of social care and health, because too often it still seems to me that it is seen as two separate issues when we all know they're so closely meshed. We need a grown-up discussion about this when all the parties can set aside their differences and see how we can sustain what has been a wonderful organisation for so many years. We don't want to see it going to an America or an Australian type, or having to buy in your insurance and everything else. But we've got to be realistic about the fact that people are living longer, not such a bad thing. People are surviving birth when they didn't used to. And because we're able to treat people better, we have greater complexities of our elderly population, who often present with multiple problems. There's no easy answers on how to fund the NHS. Let's not get away from it. And I've heard weird and wonderful ways of how we're going to raise the extra cash. There's no doubt about it, it's going to need some sort of cash injection. But money, just throwing money at something is not the answer. I think they've tried that in different areas of the NHS.
Can I ask you to sum up, please,
Thank
Councillor
you.
Evans?
We need to look at recruitment. We know there's going to be a doctor shortage. We've known it for years, but successive governments have not done anything. We need to stand back, take a realistic look at it, and set aside our differences so we can continue to have this wonderful service. And I would urge people to support the motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Councillor Kay, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If you look back over the last few council meetings, nearly every motion we've had has been to do with national issues rather than local issues. Now, of course, it is quite legitimate to do that, but I feel perhaps the emphasis should be the other way, since we are the people who can actually do something promptly about local things. I do feel that perhaps this motion, like many of the ones we've had in the past, the creation of the Labour Party machinery rather than the creation of the local Labour group. No doubt somebody will get up to either confirm or deny that. I expect you to deny it. You know, it's all right going back over history. I like doing that. I quite enjoy it. But just because somebody did something right in the 1940s doesn't mean they've still got a legitimate right to run things in the early part of the 21st century. And after all, you know, really it should be the Tories who were cock-a-hoop over this, because they've committed themselves to put in billions more into the National Health Service than the Labour Party promised in its manifesto. Really, what's happened over the past, it's more than half a century now, it's been a tug of war. Ian mentions ideology, but both sides have an ideology. Socialism on one side and capitalism on the other. And Mary's right, she's gone. You know, you've got to get together and try to work something out and try to, like we do with the rubbish, you've got to try to get common ground and pull together. What I think has destroyed not only the National Health, or damaged it, not only the National Health Service, but the educational system, is that it's in constant flux and change. You know, we want to establish a proper plan and work forward. I don't think, I agree with the first 3 paragraphs, but I don't think, you know, you've got the magic 6 bullets to micromanage the National Health Service. I think national matters should be left to national governments. We can press general principles, more money, better management, less bureaucracy, more control by qualified medics, but we can't dictate the steps which must be taken in order to get success. So I'll probably abstain on this. I'm with it in spirit, but I don't like the detail.
Thank you, Councillor Kay. Councillor Ray, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's always pleasing, and we always hear the report there. This is Councillor Ovens advises there about the successful treatment of one of our family. We can all quote them, and that's to the credit and our thanks there to the medical staffs, and include all in hospitals, our doctors, and our local clinics. The Councillor Kay mentioned there about this sum of over £20 billion, I think it is, Steve, going into the National Health Service. But where is the money going to? Since 2009, 2010, the private sector has doubled. It has more than doubled. 2010, it was £4 billion going into the private sector. 2016-17, it is £9 billion going into the private sector. So there's 20-odd billion pound there that we've been promised by the Prime Minister. How much is that going into hands-on in our hospitals? The NHS costs £1.4 billion a day. The new NHS Commissioning Board, which, and I'm advised, started of April of this year, will cost £227 million a year to run. The world's biggest quangle. The astronomical price tag comes despite the NHS facing its toughest financial settlement in history, with healthcare budgets slashed and thousands of frontline nursing posts axed. The work done in the private hospitals, such as hip and knee replacements, and contracts to run services such as our community health and psychotherapy, which were put out to tender by the commissioning groups. They want their profit out of this lot, the private sector, the quangos. The organisation says that 515,000 non-urgent operations and surgical procedures were carried out by the private clinics for the NHS in 2017, about 6% of their total. The Tory-led government is implementing the biggest restructure of the National Health Service in England. The Health and Social Care Act is pushing an agenda of privatisation, fragmentation, and market competition of healthcare provision, supposedly to cut costs and improve the efficiency of health service. How the hell can we have competition in the National Health Service? More money being shot at it into the private sector. And what does the private sector do? What's it doing to us? It costs more money. Service quality decreases and patients suffer. It increases health equalities. We've all heard about the postcode in healthcare. It fragments services. It's a race to the bottom in terms of staff.
Could you sum up, please, Councillor?
It's a race. It leads to a race to the bottom in terms of staff conditions of employment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Walsh, please.
Thanks very much indeed, Mr. Mayor. I'll make it fairly clear that I am a child of the NHS. I think very literally when you look at my age in total, and that is I was born right at the beginning of April 1949, which if you count backwards is 9 months and 2.5 weeks after the bill for the creating the NHS came into law. I don't know quite what it did for my parents, but obviously it did something for them. The funny thing is, of course, as many of the things that my parents saw at that time are now coming back. We're seeing things like illnesses thought finished with, like rickets and TB. And we're actually seeing, and we're seeing in some parts of Teesside now, a decrease in the age of mortality. Something I don't think anybody would ever believe they would have seen. But is the NHS at the moment fit for purpose in terms of dealing with these problems? I would argue it is, but it is still burdened with much of the problems put on it by past governments, particularly since 2010, particularly the Health and Social Care Act, which has been spoken about, and which means effectively a free market for any particular private organisation that is seen as qualified wanting to come in the market. One thing I didn't know actually until I did a bit of work on that is once those companies come into the NHS, they can then trade under the NHS logo, which means that most people are actually totally unaware of the extent to which the service they're using has already been privatised. all the time this asset stripping has been going on, the NHS workforce has become increasingly demoralised. Nurses' training bursaries have been abolished, and junior doctors' contracts leave them working longer with fewer breaks, putting patient safety at risk. There are more than 100,000 unfilled staff vacancies, and that's leading to 4 million people waiting for surgery at any given time, more than 500,000 people waiting more than 18 weeks for a hospital appointment, while accident and emergency waiting and response times are the worst they've ever been. Now, I'd argue, has that money that was granted by, I almost said Mrs. Thatcher, by Theresa May the week before last, is it sustainable? Well, you know, you've heard people like the King's Fund and the Institute for Fiscal Studies saying it isn't, that it's below what is actually needed. And of course, there are strings, and those strings rate how those funds are going to be spent. And a clue was given during the Prime Minister's questions on the day after her Sunday announcement on June the 20th, when she stated that much of the extra money be made available will go towards developing local sustainability and transformation plans, and their partner, the Accountable Care Organisations, which are obviously going to be the next phase in Jeremy Hunt's plans for privatisation and liberalisation. Both are an attempt to further deconstruct the NHS and open up the potential for health, finance, and insurance companies to win long-term contracts that have been responsibility where they would have responsibility, providing the health and social care for a given region. And make no mistake, what that means is that the services that we provide in our adults department could be at risk, and we will again see that work being transformed under a different flag. In perhaps his last legacy to this world, Stephen Hawking had secured a judicial review to test the lawfulness of these concepts. That review was granted, and it's going to be heard, and I wish it well. Now, finishing, Chairman, as this is a Labour resolution, I'm going to end with the words that Labour's Shadow Health Secretary, Jonathan Ashworth, said in Parliament last week. Jonathan is actually visiting Broughton Hospital tomorrow afternoon, if people want to go along. Very much a place I know very, very well from many weeks. Very much a Marie Celeste facility with a closed ward, closed mine A&E unit, and if they can now get away with it, a closed A&E post-outpatient unit. But I echo Jonathan Ashworth's words. Our commitment to reinstate the NHS remains and takes on even greater importance. We recognise the status quo is not an option. Labour's health team will begin over the coming months to consult on the future of NHS structures with relevant professionals, trade unions, patients and campaigners about a proposal in the next Labour manifesto. Change is needed and change.
Can you sum up, please, Councillor Walsh? Thank you, Councillor Walsh. Councillor Thompson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm pleased that Councillor Walsh did actually have the opportunity of speaking. What are we going to make of this motion? I think the narrative and the preamble, we've all said, reflects across the board the concern that members have in this chamber of supporting and sustaining a viable national health service. We perhaps are all privy to the history of the establishment of it. What none of us are privy to is the future that will be holding to it in the decades ahead. What we do know is that many people who have served in the National Health Service over the last 7 decades have, in a vast majority, given of their commitment to serving members of this community and members in the community nationwide. So we say thank you to all of those people who have made significant endeavour to support a health service that is free at the point of delivery to those who need it. Now, the motion asks us to support the National Health Service, but to look critically at how it is managed. that is what we do here, is it not, at a local level, with our own scrutiny system. So my concern is that we don't lose the focus of what a national health service means at national level, but also at local level. So I'm all in favour of audit. I'm all in favour of scrutiny. And I wish that we could do more. However, what is of great interest is that by engaging in this scrutiny over the last 3 years, when this authority has become more and more privy to the mismanagement in the National Health Service, the misuse of resources, and how we feel as elected members that given the opportunity we could do better with that funding. We have seen the devolution, have we not, of child nursing care. And having looked at how that was administered previously, we have done things differently, but engaged. And that's the important point. The political movement to try and think about how would we best deliver a service has become, well, we can't deliver any service as long as there is a conflict of how funding is input. So, we need to be clear about what our objectives are. And certainly my objective, Mr. Mayor, is to ensure that every endeavour is made so that anyone who needs care of whatever age has that care readily available. Now, if that funding has to come from this authority, or if that care has to come from any of the hospitals that are in our region
Can I ask you to sum up, please, Councillor Thompson?
that are privately established, if that care has to come from care homes in this borough, which are privately run, I don't have a problem with that. My concern is that those who need care should have it delivered to them. So, in principle, I'm in favour of looking critically at how the NHS is funded, how it's managed, and how we, at this level, can input a critical evaluation of how all of those services are put together, managed, and delivered. So
Yes, that's
it
time,
isn't
Councillor
about,
Thompson.
this
you.
isn't about a party issue. This is about supporting a government that is prepared to put in £20 billion extra into a service that we all
That's
support.
time, thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Hannaway, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The trouble is how much of that extra money is actually going into the reorganisation of the system and not the actual treatment. I mean, I'm all in favour of us all working together and putting aside our differences, but there would have to be trust. We would have to be sure that all parties involved in working together were actually committed to a future for the NHS. Councillor Walsh mentioned the sustainability and transformation plans, and you know, we rejected the plan because we could see exactly where it was heading, that it was carving up the NHS in a convenient size for private contracts. It was, when it came to us, it's based on a notion called self-care. You know, self-care, you look after yourself. And I went to a lecture in Durham, a health professor, who said that the trouble with this idea of self-care is it just simply does not take any account of health inequalities in society at all. You know, so he said, for example, you know, if a single parent has several children and is holding down several part-time jobs, they are much more likely to smoke because smoking has mental stimulant qualities that will keep them going for longer, even though it's very bad for you in the long term. So people in those kind of positions simply don't have the easy control over lifestyle that more affluent people do. And any plan for the NHS has to take account of these health inequalities, or it simply won't work. I think in a hospital, a bit like in a school, 2 and 2 make 5. The extra number is the goodwill of the staff. And if you focus exclusively on the bottom line and things get worse for the staff in terms of pay and conditions, then you lose that extra number. And it doesn't work anymore. It can't work unless 2 and 2 make 5. I think also on the point of actually the funding of the NHS, we can't, and how much it costs, we can't afford to do without it. In the US private insurance system, twice as much per head is spent as is spent here. It's not many people look at this aspect of it. It's not a question of can we afford the NHS, it's can we afford not to have it. And the reason for that is very simply that when you have private insurance, there has to be private choice. And so there will be some people who take out a lot of insurance and some people who take out less insurance. And the people who take out a lot of insurance will take it out either because they're affluent or because they feel they will need it most. And so what happens then is, through the very normal operation of supply and demand, nothing evil, just the normal operation of the market, you lose the big pool of healthy people who are all paying in but don't take anything out until they need it, usually later on in life. So that huge pool of healthy non-users goes under the private system. So that's something we just can't afford to lose. And so for those reasons, I support the motion.
Councillor Turner, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm really pleased Councillor Evans got a chance to go first in this debate, because I think what she did was her history lesson brought it into what it should be. This isn't a political football. Regardless of what Councillor Jeffrey wants to paint, this was an ex-Liberal who was then Tory Prime Minister who commissioned a report. All three parties had it in their manifesto. And because the Labour Party became the governing party at that time, it was then introduced by the Labour Party. Over successive years, every single party has pumped money into the NHS. Right? I also want to give Councillor Walsh a bit more credit than Councillor Kay gave him, because I think it's an excellently worded motion that in principle it's got very little to disagree with. Right? Nobody disputes the fantastic efforts and the achievements that this NHS produces. Nobody can argue, as Councillor Hannaway said, that it's often the people rather than the service which make it what it is. And what it is what's important. Regardless of the picture that's painted, often by people in this room, by politicians, by people within the service, right, of a downtrodden, dying institution, we mustn't forget it is the #1 rated health service in the world. So regardless of what everybody thinks or says has happened to it, it is already the #1 service in the world. Coming back to the motion note, you've got 6 points, Councillor Walsh, and that's where I struggle with those 6 points. Right? 1 and 2 have some merit, right? But we are less than 2 years on from the Carter report, which was published and we're still working through, right? So we've got to implement that, and that touches on some of these points that you've already got in here. In terms of point 3, you talk about funding through new fiscal methods. That's a bit vague for me. So for me, funding comes from taxation or it comes from private payments. It's one or the other. And I don't really see how we're going to find a new third way for that. All right. Point 4 is vague at best, and it's also a little bit contradictory. When you look at sustainability and transformation partnerships, then they're designed to come from patients, from practitioners, from people who use the service. That's how our current CCG came about, and that's sort of what you're asking for, so I don't really see why that point's in there. Point 5 glosses over the fact that in its 70-year history, only one health secretary has sold a hospital, and that was a Labour health secretary. And the proliferation of PFI deals which have come through both governments, but predominantly from 1997 through to 2010, right? We do need to get rid of them. If we could pay them off tomorrow, I think we should, because they are an absolute drain on our NHS funding and resources. Which brings me to point 6, talking about ex-Labour health secretaries. The Mayor of Greater Manchester already has the authority over local NHS and social care services. I don't personally think it's a bad idea, right? It's maybe a model that could be explored, but it is a model that we already have in this country. So I don't really see why this motion should call for it. So like I said, in principle, there's little wrong with the motion. And I thank you for bringing it to the table. If nothing else, it gives us all the opportunity to express what a wonderful service we have and how for 70 years it's been absolutely fantastic. But because I don't think the points and the motion actually touch on anything that's really relevant, then for that reason I won't be supporting it, Councillor Wall. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Councillor Sue Jeffrey, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. A few points from me. I think first of all, the idea that health is not a local issue is bizarre, to say the least. I mean, poor health affects every single one of the services that we provide within this local authority. So if we have a population in poor health, that affects how we deliver our services to older people, how we support children. It impacts on our ability to get people into work, on the level of productivity in the area. It affects how people access our services. It affects how we can grow our economy. So health, and good health, is absolutely crucial to the future of this borough, and it's absolutely crucial to the work of this council. And so this motion is also. I think the second thing to say is that to suggest that in some way our health service is not in crisis is equally strange. I cannot understand. Anybody who has spoken to anybody who has used the health service recently will know, yes, of course there are lots of very good examples of how well it works, but there's equally lots and lots of examples of people having to wait longer and longer and longer to get the basic treatment that they need to be able to live their lives appropriately. So things like knee and hip replacements, those basics, cataract operations that can make a complete difference to somebody's lives. Waiting lists for these are getting longer all the time. We hear about queues outside of the eye clinic in James Cook Hospital. You know, it is a really, really difficult situation. What is the response of the Conservative government on the 70th anniversary of the health service? Well, it's to announce that there's going to be, I can't remember how many billion was it that they were going to invest, or they are going to invest in the health service all of a sudden? Have they suddenly discovered there's a problem? The fact is that there has been, I would consider, gross negligence on behalf of successive governments in failing to invest in our health service properly. And what we're talking about in terms of the Prime Minister's announcements of however many million it was really sticking plaster and filling a gap that they had made themselves. We've been talking about privatisation. Why does privatisation matter in the health service? Privatisation does exist in the health service. The private market exists in the health service. Why does it matter? It matters because when you're in a situation where there's scarce resources, those resources need to be spent on the services for people and not on the profits of companies. And we need to make sure that that is where all that money is directed. Finally, I just want to say something about reorganisation of health services. I've been working in the public sector for the last 30-odd years in various guises. Reorganisation of the health service happens time and time and time again. Every time it happens, it takes away resources, it shifts personnel, it means that our focus is on structural and organisational issues and not on getting the job done, which is to make our people more healthy and to support our social care system. So we absolutely need to support this motion, because this motion is about saying it's time to draw a line under all that. It's time to understand what our health service needs to be in the future, how it links with our social care services, how it should be funded, and how it should be delivered in the future. And you know, that's not unreasonable. I cannot imagine anybody in this chamber not wanting to support those things. And I absolutely hope that you all do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Councillor Dick, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to talk about values, because I feel that that's what this motion is really talking about, the values that we want to see enshrined in how we deliver an NHS going forward. Yes, as a Labour politician, I'm very proud that the Labour Party introduced the NHS, which has served us well for 70 years. But I'm interested in the future, not the past. And I believe that's what this motion is discussing. There's been a lot of talk about top-down reorganisation. I started my career in the NHS 17, 18 years ago, and then everyone's biggest talking point at work was the latest reorganisation. But that's okay, because 5 years later it was knocked off the agenda because we had another reorganisation. And every time this happens, it reduces morale, it causes stress. People commissioning services, whether in primary care or in hospitals, are saying, oh, well, can we do that now? We'll have to go back to the drawing board. Let's put that on hold. It is one of the single most disruptive things that occurs within the health service, and it happens time and again and again, and it shouldn't. And that's a message to all political parties, to all health secretaries and to the civil servants under them. And that's why I think particularly point 4 in this motion is essential. I also want to talk about values, because value is used a lot in conjunction with money. People can say the NHS costs so many billion a day, or it's 7% of GDP. That isn't the only cost of the NHS. It also costs time and goodwill from the people who work in it. I know my own colleagues and people I've worked alongside who give of themselves for the NHS and for their patients, regardless of how many hours they're contracted to work or where they're supposed to be that day, or whether their car is paid for to go to that patient's house. It's impossible to quantify that with the data that we have, and that plays a large part in the success of this healthcare system. By fragmenting this service, by shivving off elements of it to the private sector, which only wants the profitable components and isn't interested in the other bits, you degrade that function of people to give to their organisation. You affect the morale, you affect the ethos of the workplace, and I don't think we have quantified the impact that's going to have going forward. There is a reason why the NHS delivers so much more value for money than other healthcare systems with the same amount spent upon them. So I believe going forward we need to think what our values are and what value we believe we will get. What value we will get when we call something free at the point of delivery. Well, I don't like that language. Let's call it what it is. It's profit at the point of commissioning, which is a totally different thing. Let's start saying that, because I think it's more honest. Let's talk about where the government's new money is going to go. It's not really new money at all. It's just the money that should have been there in the first place. But nevertheless, it's going to the NHS. That means it's also going to the private companies who are commissioned to provide NHS services. It's free at the point of delivery, but it's profit at the point of commissioning. I am strongly supporting this motion because it reflects my values, and I hope it reflects yours and that you can support it too.
Thank you, Councillor Dick. Councillor Davis, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, so I too was at the LJ conference this week and sat on the same question time event that I think Councillor Jeffrey was at as well. And I was quite impressed with the whole discussion that was taking place around this issue, and managed to get a couple of questions in as well, which was quite good. But I was going to read out some of the people that was on that board, because I think it's important. There was Izzy Sacombe, who was the chairman of the LGA Community Wellbeing Board, Niall Dixon, who was the chief executive of the NHS Confederation, Sir Amias Morse, who was a comptroller and auditor general of the National Audit Office, and the chair was David Brindle. And there was also Jonathan Maron, who I believe is he works under the Health Secretary Jeremy Hunt in Health and Adult Social Care Ministry or something. It's actually details weren't written down on the app, so I've not been able to get that. But there was obviously all persuasions of councillors there from all different parties and backgrounds. And Jonathan Maron, who again was from the ministry, had suggested the map that was in the motion. He's actually said that in that session about the map. He thinks that's quite key. And there was also a lot of people saying the same thing about health and social care in the NHS should all be under the same umbrella, not just given the name to take away the problem and then not deal with it. It's there to be combined. It's hand in hand, as someone said, I think, at the event. He also summed up that local areas will and should work on providing the solutions to the NHS and social care. So basically what they were trying to say was maybe it's the local areas that should come up with the ideas and the solutions. Well, I think, you know, we've all been talking about it for long enough now to, you know, if they haven't got the right end of the stick by now, then they'll never get that right end of the stick, I don't think. And it's clear as well, it came out well and clear to me, that depending on where you live, the postcode lottery depends on the level of service that we receive in general. Levels of funding to deal with these issues locally, as we all know, is the sticking plaster of the adult social care levy, which again depends on your location, depends on how much you pay in, which I think I've read that point in the past. And I think someone actually stood up as well and made the good point. He was from Devon, happened to be sat next to me, and said that when people move out of the urban areas, your likes of your London, your likes of your Manchester, and they get to that retirement age where they want to go and retire in the countryside, it's councils like ours that tend to absorb that type of person, because we are in a nice setting, we are in a nice place for people to have the quiet life. But then it becomes our council's responsibility then to look after them in their social care as they reach their end of life, if you like. So again, that cost then comes onto our council. You don't have this type of cost associated with social care in the likes of Westminster Council, because a lot of the people there tend to be of working age. So that was quite key for me. Another thing as well, just quickly, is that there's an inventor in this borough who has invented a device that he believes could save the NHS millions and millions of pounds every minute. I don't know where to take it for him, but he's trialled it on me, he's shown me how it works, and it's basically all the observations that they take, that the doctors, they put the thing around your arm, they pump up your blood pressure, check your temperature in your lug, they do all that type of stuff. It does it in 2 seconds flat. It's great. I thought it was amazing, and I thought just how much time that would take out of the National Health Service would be amazing, and that's someone on our doorstep. And now I'd love it if someone could tell me where I would need to send this guy to, because that, to me, would be a great feat.
Can you sum up, please, Councillor Davis?
Of course, yeah, it would be a great feat for our area if we could get someone like that to save the NHS a load of money and have that flagging up on our borough as well. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Councillor Massey, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Ovens was right earlier at the very start of the debate to highlight the work of William Beveridge in bringing to public attention what a National Health Service was and what it needed to be in the country. However, I feel that Councillor Turner's version of history here is somewhat revisionist. While all three parties might have pledged to create a National Health Service at the 1945 election, what that actually meant was very different for each of those parties. Labour, for instance, had an outward commitment to the NHS since 1934 and a more vague commitment since 1909 at the very beginning of the party's journey. I think what's important to recognise here is that the coalition government, which was a coalition of all parties, did accept Beveridge's report, which was a great thing and a great step forward. However, what happened when that coalition government fell? What happened when the coalition government, when the war ended? Churchill took over a caretaker administration. Henry Willink was the Secretary of State for Health, Conservative at the time, diluted Beveridge's report, introduced the concepts of charging, introduced ideas around how the NHS could be worked for a profit, in essence. These were never enacted because it was a caretaker government, but it's important. That gives you an idea of what a Conservative Party would have done in 1945 had they won the election. It would not be the NHS that we know today. However, the views of Councillor Turner don't surprise me, considering his former party's former leader once opined that the NHS should be privatised and run on an American-style system. Back to the present day, though, I think Councillor Jeffrey's stolen my thunder somewhat by asking the question to the Chamber, do you really feel that our NHS is functioning as well as it should? And I think the answer is pretty much no. Yes, we've all had great service from our NHS. We recognise all the staff, many of whom I know. I've got many friends who are nurses. They work hard, but they're not necessarily getting the resources and the support that they need. Our hospitals aren't as good as perhaps they should be. And I think that, as Councillor Davies has referenced, we don't want a lottery for our healthcare system whatsoever. You should get the best care when you walk in that door. And I think the changes that have been made at the NHS over the last 10, 20 years have eroded some of that. My first ever speech in this council, when it was back in Eston, was around the NHS. I got heckled by Valerie Holton at the time. But the thing I mentioned there was that Nye Bevan, who set up the NHS as the Minister of Health in the Labour government in 1948, he said that the NHS was in place of fear. It's what his autobiography is called, and that's what we need to protect. We need to protect the fact that no one in this country, whatever creed, colour, sex, party, political allegiance, should ever be scared about getting ill in this country. And I do think that people are beginning to get scared, and that's why this motion needs to be approved today.
Thank you, Councillor Massey. We've got the motion before us. Do you want to reply? Yeah, sorry. Sorry, Councillor Jeffrey, if you...
Yeah, just a couple of points, if I may, Chair. Mary Ovens, your very first question, you didn't understand what accrued privatisation was. I didn't know there was any other sort, to be perfectly honest, was my response to that. But I wonder if you went to the briefing. I wonder if you went to the briefing before the meeting. There was a handful of us. Right, okay, well, you'll be aware what the presentation said. It was a presentation by the Durham Tees Valley Community Rehabilitation Company, and it's one of the 21 companies that were formed when the Tories privatised 80% of the then probation service. Out of these 21 companies, there's only one that's performing well, and it's the one in this area, and that's because it's got a base in local services and local public services. The other 20, you might be interested to know, are almost regarded as failing, and they've been bailed out to the tune of £400 million over the past 4 years since they were privatised, because the government refuses to concede that that move at the time, which was ideologically driven, was actually the wrong mistake to make. And a number of people have raised the point about a strategy for funding, and I think you were one of the ones that did that as well, Mary. What we don't want is people bunging money at the health service or any other service when a problem arises. We need a funding strategy, and that's what the resolution actually talks about. Councillor Turner tells us we have a wonderful service. Well, yes, we do. But I'd like to remind you, a year ago, Oxfam said the health service was suffering a humanitarian crisis. And as far as I know, I don't think Oxfam is a political party. I'm not saying things are quite how they described them then, but we've certainly got a problem on our hands, and we do need some strategy to retain our wonderful service. Councillor Thompson appears to accept some degree of community influence, but I don't think he wants to go quite as far as some degree or element of democratic control, because unless we get that, we're going to get the STPs and the accountable care organisations thrust upon us, and we're not going to be able to adequately represent our constituents. Which brings me finally, I think, to the points that Councillor Kay actually raised. I think the last time we met Councillor Kay, we discussed Dorset Road in Gisborough, so I don't think you can regard that as a national issue as far as that goes, but we did discuss the Asda-Sainsbury proposed merger. That was a national issue, but it had very real local concerns, which is the point that Sue Jeffrey made when she responded on those points. Again, I would say support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Can we go to the vote, please? All those in favour of the motion. Okay. Any against? Sorry. Okay. Those against, please. Okay. Thank you very much. Item 10, to appoint members. We only have one item on there, and that is for Councillor Carol Jeffrey to replace Councillor Thrower on the Personnel and General Purposes Committee. Can we agree to that, please? Okay, thank you very much. There are no questions from members of the council, so close the meeting. Wish everyone a pleasant summer break.
It's a bit dulled in now, Dennis.